and Senate. He was born and raised in Nash County and graduated from UNC Chapel Hill. Republican Pat McCrory is North Carolina's 74th governor, his term beginning in 2013. He was Charlotte's longest-serving mayor, a record 7 terms. He grew up in Guilford County and graduated from Catawba College. We have many topics we'd like to cover this evening, and we'd like this to feel more like an open conversation. Each of you will have up to 90 seconds for your initial response to a topic. There's sure to be follow-up questions and discussions, and we're hoping you will talk with each other.
And at the end of the evening, each of you will have a minute for a closing statement. Before the broadcast, as you know, we drew to see who would get the first question, and that first question goes first to Mr. McCrory, then to Mr. Cooper, and then to Mr. Cecil.
One of the primary responsibilities for the next governor is going to be to help the state recover from Hurricane Matthew. If elected, what will you do to make sure the tens of thousands of people who have been directly and dramatically affected are taken care of? Mr. McCrory?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, my prayers are with the 26 people who lost their lives and their families. We're grieving with them, but I'm so proud of the way North Carolina came together in responding to an unexpected hurricane hitting our coast. The thing I'm very proud of my team that I put together was not only did we have a great team that was deployed early and deployed across the state, anticipating every type of hurricane scenario, but I'm also very pleased that we had enough money in our rainy day fund to pay for having so much money in the rainy day fund, which would have been a huge mistake had he been governor and we not had sufficient money in the rainy day fund. Of all things, the rainy day fund, and we had the most rain we've ever seen in Lumberton in decades. But the thing I'm putting together, I'm announcing tomorrow a long-term hurricane task force with people from throughout the East, and we're going to look at housing, because that's our number one goal, repairing the infrastructure, water and sewer, and also repairing our roads. And in the short term, my main goal is to get people out of short-term shelters and into permanent housing.
Mr. Cooper.
I grew up in Nash County in eastern North Carolina, and it's unfortunate that people have gotten hit there again. In 1999, we had Hurricane Floyd, and it devastated eastern North Carolina. I was living in Rocky Mount at the time, and I remember Governor Hunt calling and wanted me to meet him at the airport, and I couldn't get there because all of the roads were flooded. As a state senator and Senate Majority Leader at the time, I introduced legislation that provided for hundreds of millions of dollars for relief for eastern North Carolina. And I know what kind of rebuilding process that it takes to make sure we get people back on their feet again. I've been all over eastern North Carolina, I've been talking to people. We need to help them immediately, but it's going to be a matter of weeks and years to make sure we get the housing, to make sure we get businesses going. And this is one of the most difficult places in our state with our economy right now. And Governor McCrory, he knows that I've always supported a strong rainy day fund, and that's where we got the money to be able to help eastern North Carolina before, because I have supported it my entire career. Governor McCrory asked for money from the General Assembly. They passed a bill that provided for $500,000 to defend and bring lawsuits in House Bill 2, of all things, that is earmarked in the Disaster Relief Fund, and Governor McCrory didn't even veto the legislation. What we need is to make sure North Carolina is ready for this. We need a strong leader who knows about rebuilding. We've done it before. Eastern North Carolina is tough. I know, because I grew up there, and we can do it again. We have to.
Mr. Cecil.
I moved here in 1997 and was immediately struck with the flooding from Floyd when that came through. Although heart goes out to all of the citizens of eastern North Carolina with the flooding again this time. I know that it's just a repeat of a previous flooding, and it indicates a lot of things that weren't corrected the first time. I-95 was closed again. You have to learn from each flood. You have to spend the money to correct those things that happen. And that's going to be money that comes from the taxpayers, one way or another, whether it's federal or state. But we've got to help those people, and a lot of them need a lot of help, definitely.
Everybody's talked about Hurricane Floyd that came through only 17 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, I might add that this governor was the one who said this was going to be worse than Hurricane Floyd, and a lot of people mocked me. I might also add that the Attorney General is dead wrong. He hasn't always supported a large rainy day fund. In fact, just 2 weeks ago and a month ago in Lumberton, he stated we have too big of a rainy day fund and we need to spend more of that money on other things. And thank God we didn't have a governor that had that short-term political aptitude to look at the next election as opposed to the next storm or the next hurricane that is going to hit North Carolina.
Talking about spending money wherever it comes from, a lot of these areas that were hit this time, Princeville being one, Seven Springs, look at Windsor down in eastern North Carolina that's had its share more than just these two storms, or Highway 12 along the Outer Banks. We see destruction happening, we rebuild. Destruction, rebuilding. Should these areas be rebuilt again? Mr. McCrory, we go to you first, then Mr. Cooper.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Actually, that's part of the long-term plan. In fact, I've talked with Mayor Bobby Jones, who one of the most remarkable men I've ever met at Princeville. His house was underwater, and we're going to have that discussion. If we do rebuild, where and how? And what methods do we use to rebuild? And I think that question needs to be asked in every area that has constant flooding. And that's part of the long-term plan, where I'm going to have engineers a part of this long-term committee. I'm going to have architects. We're going to have environmentalists. We're going to have people who think, what is the long-term sustainable plan on how to rebuild these communities? The most tragic part of these hurricanes is it hits the people who can least afford it. And that's the part that just grabs my heart, is we've got to do everything we can to help those people who can least afford a hurricane, and then make sure our plans are not putting those people in that position again. It's
Should we
extremely
rebuild
unfair.
again, Mr. Cooper?
Mayor, well, the question is, what kind of leader do you want to help rebuild North Carolina? What kind of governor do you want? And one of the decisions that were made after Floyd is that we did do some mitigation, and there were some places that were not rebuilt, and it was a wise thing because they were flooded again. But clearly we have some places like Princeville and others that were hit twice, and we're really going to have some strong conversations about that. But Governor McCrory talks about people who can least afford it in rural eastern North Carolina. And here he is opposing Medicaid expansion that could help health care in eastern North Carolina. That's all 100% federal dollars that can make a difference in the rural economy. And he's talking now about the people who can least afford it, when we've had ways to help rural eastern North Carolina. And it's time we take a long-term view of this.
Mr. Cecil, should we rebuild those areas?
Some of them will be rebuilt, but we need to learn from the lessons of Katrina. We're not rebuilding in the lowest lands. We're not building flat to the ground. Elevates, make sure we've got the transportation, build homes that, just like we do along the coast. Those houses are built with the presumption there's going to be a hurricane, the presumption there's going to be another flood. And if they rebuild, it should be with that knowledge. There's a lot of areas that probably should not be rebuilt. People were living there and have lived there for many years because it was low-cost land. And it was low cost because it was subject to flooding.
Let me tell you something else that we just did that you need to know and the audience needs to know, is that for those people that were hurt the most, which were the poor, we've extended unemployment benefits. We've helped with food stamps so they can immediately get it. We've cut through the bureaucracy. And we're also going to be helping with other items regarding infrastructure. I've had a great relationship working with President Obama on some emergency relief to make sure Craven County was just added yesterday outside of New Bern and Waynesboro to help more people with cash that can immediately get these poor people clothes and supplies. And I'm very, very proud of our team's leadership.
Okay, Mr. Cooper, very quickly on this, and I want to move on, but it seems like every time Mr. McCrory is making a statement, you're shaking your head.
Well, he talked about extending unemployment benefits. he pushed legislation that made North Carolina's unemployment benefits the most restrictive in the country, and did it on the backs of working people. And there are a lot of people in eastern North Carolina looking for work now. And in fact, in over about half of our counties, there are more people looking for work now than they were before the recession. Wow. And what we've got to do is to have a leader who understands that, who's going to have policies that help the working poor, that help the middle class, and not those at the top.
I'll tell you, you got a leader right here. When I came into office, I inherited something from Beverly Perdue, one of Roy's biggest supporters. And it was called a $2.6 billion debt that North Carolina owed the federal government. We borrowed $2.6 billion for unemployment. Had I continued the same program that Mike Easley and Beverly Perdue and Roy had supported, we would be in $4 billion in debt right now. Guess what we did? We've paid off the debt, and now if we have another recession, and by the way, if we need to help these people, we now have $2 billion in reserves in case there's a downturn or in case these people need the extra benefits, which I have extended. That's exactly the strong leadership we need now more than ever, not the old leadership. Spend everything you got and put the debt on future generations.
Gentlemen, we will return to the economy in a future question, but we need to move on here so we get to a few more questions tonight. Staying with Matthew for a moment, we learned last week that floodwaters from Hurricane Matthew carried some coal ash into the News River at Goldsboro. Now, a law signed last year allows coal ash to remain in pits just like the one in Goldsboro at 6 of Duke's 14 sites around the state. Do we need to rethink that decision in the wake of the storm? That question for you first, Mr. Cooper.
Well, one of the things that I'm going to do as governor is listen to the scientists who are providing the advice, unlike Governor McCrory. Governor McCrory's scientists decided that well water that was by families was unsafe, and so they sent a notice to those families that the water was unsafe. And Governor McCrory, for political reasons or the fact that he worked at Duke Energy or for whatever reason, told them to change it. And they rescinded the order. And the chief scientist in the state resigned, saying publicly that she was not going to be part of an administration that deliberately misleads the public. Now, what we need is public officials who are going to listen to scientists, who are going to believe what they say, who act on that, who use data and facts, and don't let their political ideology rule the day, and particularly when you're not being honest with the public, like his administration is. When the top scientist, nonpartisan person with a good paying job, resigns, and yet another scientist too, saying that the governor is on the phone talking to his public information officer in the room, telling them to rescind this order. That's wrong, and I'm not going to be that kind of governor.
Mr. McCrory, we'll let you respond to that in just a moment, but let me allow Mr. Cecil to answer this question next.
Over the last 6 months, I've spent a lot of time in the eastern part, looking at the lowlands, going, wow, I see how Hurricane Floyd made so many problems. But the people down there were telling me that their problem is the well water. They don't have water to drink. They are fearful of even using it with their animals. Several of them commented that it was only in June of this year that they finally started getting the bottled water delivered. And the HB 630 law that you talked about that was passed by the legislature contains a provision that they'll have to put in public water lines to certain areas. And the basic date on that is by the end of 2018. And to a person, they will stand there and they will tell me in Goldsboro and Snow Hill and others, they absolutely do not believe in any way, shape, or form those water lines will be put in before 2020, at best.
So do we need to rethink the decision to leave coal ash in pits in other areas? We should point out Goldsboro is one of that's planned to be excavated, but should we rethink it?
As an engineer, I understand where the problem is going, and the underground water under those things and the surface water near them, particularly the underground water, can never be cleaned. Surface water will clean itself or can be cleaned like they did with the Dan River. But the pits themselves are a continuing hazard, and the only thing we can really do with that is properly mitigate them. But there's a tremendous amount of ash in those things. When you start looking at it and say, well, how many truckloads have we got to haul to a pit to bury it properly? We're going to need some major highways and a lot more trucks.
Understood. Mr. McCrory?
Well, he's right about the engineering and the environmental damage. You can't move them all because you'd actually cause more environmental damage to our state by moving them all. Each individual coal pit is a unique situation, but I've got to correct the record of 3 years of false advertisements by Roy Cooper's super PACs. Have been running literally for 3.5 years. You know, coal ash on my hands, as though I did the coal ash spill in North Carolina, which is totally ridiculous. Because what's ironic is I resigned from Duke Energy 6 years ago, 2008. And well, 8 years ago, in 2008, and shortly thereafter, Jim Rogers, the CEO and chairman, endorsed Beverly Perdue and gave her a lot of money and gave Roy Cooper a lot of money in 2008 for his reelection as Attorney General. And his job is supposed to help oversight coal ash. There is not one email during his 14 years or 16 years as Attorney General where he has ever expressed concern about coal ash. Not one email. By the way, he only has 14 emails in 14 years. Not one email or not one action taken toward Duke Energy. Now, Duke Energy also, I might add, gave $10 million loan to the Democratic National Convention, which they have yet to pay back. And he has received, during his time as Attorney General, tens of thousands of dollars from Duke Energy and Progress Energy, and during that time took no action, except he did approve some action during the Perdue administration, an email, which we have a record of, which is in the public documents, an email which was approved by the Attorney General's office, which allows Duke to grandfather some of their coal ash ponds from further dam inspection, which had we had that dam inspection, maybe Dan River wouldn't have happened. And second, it also allowed Duke Energy not to have the fine. We wanted to fine them $25 million because of an email approved by the Attorney General's office and Beverly Perdue. We had to pull back that fine based upon lawyers' recommendations. And his lawyers know all about this. Sadly, the commercials don't mention this.
Mr. Cooper.
Your question was about should we excavate. So the state legislature decided they were going to create a coal ash commission made up of experts to make this decision. And the head of the Senate, the Republican leader of the Senate, said, we need this commission because we're concerned about Governor McCrory's ties to Duke Energy and the fact that he had worked there so long. And Governor McCrory sued the state legislature because he wanted sole control over this issue of what happens with the coal ash ponds. Governor McCrory didn't want somebody looking over his shoulder. Now, I've talked about coal ash publicly. Wow. I have a strong environmental record. I've been endorsed by most all of the environmental groups. And to hear Governor McCrory talk about coal ash in my record, the independent fact checkers have said you were wrong every time you said something about that.
Let me first of all, he has not refuted anything I said about the monies he's accepted, about the lack of action he's taken during 14 years. He didn't refute any of that. He changed the subject, which is what Roy Cooper is good at doing, is changing the subject. I'll tell you this, is that Duke Energy did not want, they wanted the coal ash commission. They did not want me to veto the bill. Their lobbyists were all over the House and Senate. I vetoed something they didn't want to veto because it was a bad deal for the people whose water could be impacted by coal ash. I had the courage to veto very important legislation, and I might add, the Senate did not override my veto because they read the details of it and they said, you're right, Governor, you're right. This would be harmful to the neighborhood that we're talking about in Winston-Salem.
Need to move on again so we can get to some more topics tonight. Our next question goes to Mr. Cecil. There's been a lot said about the Carolina comeback in this election and economic comeback since the recession ended. A recent poll we conducted shows a majority of voters do not feel that they're better off than they were 4 years ago. And in fact, 29% even say they feel that they're worse off. What do you say to those who find themselves still struggling, and how do you intend to help them?
When I moved here almost 20 years ago, the economy was running good, the taxes were high, and things were actually going quite well. It was a long downhill slide rather quickly through 2004, 2008, and a lot of people lost their jobs. I lost my job at one point with that recession. There has been quite a bit of comeback, but it's been very industry specific. The high technologies and the more critical industries have done well with it. Worked with RF Micro in Greensboro with the cell phone industry, and those related electronics and consumer products have come back quite well. A lot of our classic industries that we had, the furniture industry and whatnot, have not come back near as much because they can still get labor and get things done for $1 a day, and they're strictly labor dependent. I think we have made quite a bit of comeback, particularly the last 4 years. I think Governor McCrory's leadership and whatnot has done a good job of getting us recovered. I think we have a long ways to go. I think some of the new taxes have maybe been a little burdensome on the poor people that really couldn't afford much, and to find out they've got to pay sales tax on getting their car repaired really hurt a lot of them.
Mr. McCrory.
Well, what I can say is this: when I came into office 4 years ago, North Carolina's unemployment was the 5th highest in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. The 5th highest in the United States of America, 9.4%, adjusted at 8.9%. We've had one of the greatest economic recoveries in the United States of America, down to about 4.7%, down below the national average. I remember after my first year, they were going, "Governor, you still aren't below South Carolina. Our economy is so much better than it was 3 years ago. Is it still good enough? Absolutely not. Is there still more we need to do? Absolutely. But one thing we found out when we were coming into office is we owed $2.6 billion for unemployment. And we were about to tax small businesses more for unemployment. That was the solution of the liberal Democrats. The second thing, we had a $500 million misforecast on Medicaid spending. It was so broken. $500 million misforecast on Medicaid spending. We had the highest income tax and the highest corporate tax and business tax in the Southeast. Even South Carolina was beating us. Nikki Haley even told me, we don't even consider North Carolina competition anymore. So we had to make some immediate changes, or we could keep trying the same things under my predecessors, Beverly Perdue and Mike Easley. We could have kept trying those things and continued to be the 4th or 5th highest unemployment rate. We have had a great comeback. We need more, but I'm extremely proud of what's happened in North Carolina, and let the progress continue.
Mr. Cooper.
Since the recession, there's been a national economic recovery, but North Carolina is lagging behind. You go ask everyday working people whether they have seen a Carolina comeback, and most of them will tell you they are working longer and harder and for less money than they were before the recession. And the statistics show they're right. Wage growth is languishing in our state, particularly for the middle class. And Governor McCrory comes in and promises everybody a tax cut. Well, he did pretty well for those at the top. He gave the corporations and those at the top good tax cuts. But on everyday North Carolinians, many of them have seen a net tax increase, and that includes small businesses. He has raised taxes on people in 67 different ways. And Governor McCrory is putting more of a burden on the middle class and small business with taxes at a time we need to be helping small business and the middle class. And I will work to do that. I will also work to invest in public education, which is going to be a key. The new economy with the new jobs, our community colleges have got to be the drivers of workforce development. Our universities have to be the centers of innovation. And Governor McCrory, here he is going around and talking about House Bill 2 all over national TV. It is hurting our economy. You talk to economic developers, they will tell you that it's costing us jobs and costing us money. We need a governor who's going to look out for the middle class, and that's what I'm going to do.
Let me ask Roy Cooper a question. Are you gonna change the cuts in the income tax and the business tax and corporate taxes that we initiated in the last 3 years, which has resulted in a strong? You were against them. If you were so against them and you want to be the next governor, are you going to repeal it and raise the income tax on every working person who gets a paycheck in North Carolina? It wasn't just for the wealthy, and believe me, you were at Goldman Sachs raising a lot of money in New York City. You know about the wealthy. It was for everyone who earned a paycheck, got a huge reduction, a net increase in pay, from school teachers to nurses to independent business people. We were the highest income tax on paychecks.
Well,
Would you repeal those tax cuts by the
We don't
legislation?
need to increase taxes.
So that is
to
a
fix
absolute
what is
no.
We do not need to increase taxes.
That's a no.
What we need to do
Thank
is
you.
fix some of those taxes that he put on the middle class and small business, and take some of those taxes off of them is what we need to do. And
Wait,
David,
help me understand the math. If you're not going to repeal it and you're going to change it, ultimately there's going to be a difference in the income and the tax paid, right?
It's about priorities, David.
But-
I mean, the economy is going, I believe the economy is going to grow. There's a national recovery, the economy is going to grow. And over the last 4 years, Governor McCrory has made the decision, when tax revenue has come in, he wants to do corporate tax giveaways. He wants to do tax cuts for those at the top. I want to invest in education. I want to invest in teacher salaries. If you're going to be tax cuts, they're going to be tax cuts for the middle class.
You can do that without
Yes,
raising taxes.
Absolutely, we can do that. I did that when I was in the state Senate for 4 years. We were able to cut taxes for the middle class. We were also able to get our teacher salaries to the national average. We can do that again. I know we can.
But I'm trying to understand how you have it both ways. If you can
It's
do
not
that
both
without
ways.
raising taxes, it would appear that these GOP tax cuts you've criticized didn't hurt the budget.
It absolutely has hurt our investment in public education, and it has hurt the fact that he has put taxes on the middle class to help make up for it. And that's what we've got to do with making our decisions about priorities.
Let me talk real fast.
Okay, then I want to move on. Okay.
Just real quick. We lowered the income tax, and guess what? We have more income coming in to help pay for the bonds, which I proposed for universities and community colleges and state parks. We have more money coming in this year with a lower income tax. We have more money coming in this year with a corporate tax than we did 3 years ago. That's incredible progress. That's letting the economy work. And then I've reinvested that money into education. Teacher pay raises, a new med school at Carolina, a new science building at Western Carolina University, a new engineering facilities at North Carolina A&T. That's the best of both
30
worlds.
seconds, and I want to move on.
When that new money comes in again, if he gets reelected, you bet your boots that the choice for that new money will be corporate tax giveaways, further corporate tax cuts, instead of investing in education. That's what we're talking about with priorities,
Okay.
David, and that's how your math works.
I do like the part about when you get reelected. I do like that part.
Let's move on.
If.
Let's move on. Let's move on.
That's a big if.
Much has been said about House Bill 2 in this election season. We've heard ad infinitum about access to restrooms under the law. I want to talk about something else here, because perhaps the most controversial part of the law is that it excludes LGBT people from the state's anti-discrimination law, and it bans local governments from passing any ordinances to protect them. So, Mr. McCrory, I ask you, not about the restroom provisions, but about the lack of this protection. Why was this necessary?
Well, first of all, it was necessary because there was a bathroom provision.
But couldn't the law have been written without this anti-discriminatory
There was a
provision?
concept of gender identity, which was a radical concept, which, by the way, the left brought this issue up, not the right. One of the great political scams in state history and national history is Roy Cooper and the mayor of Charlotte brought this issue to North Carolina with a very powerful group called the HRC, which has helped Roy an awful lot. And they just had to add a portion of the bill which said the following: you must have gender identity or gender expression in order to get into a private sector restroom, locker room, or shower in the public access to the private sector. Had that not been there, I don't think we would have had any problem, because I don't believe in any type of discrimination based on
And I
sexual
understand that,
orientation.
but help me understand, because I've got the legislation here.
Yeah.
And as I read about all the people who are protected,
Right.
I don't see anything about the LGBT community,
By the way,
veterans,
none
or
of that
pregnant
was
women.
there. None of that was there when Roy Cooper was been Attorney General either. There has been no formal protections in North Carolina history at all. By the way, or in United States history. I would support.
Is there time for formal?
I think
protection?
there is. I think since the Supreme Court decision regarding marriage, I think there needs to be protection at the federal level. I wrote a letter as such, but I will not accept the radical changes that Roy Cooper and Jennifer Roberts has brought to North Carolina, which, do y'all even know, do either of you, or do you know, Roy, what the penalty was in Charlotte for someone who did not accept gender identity as the new requirement on identifying whether you're a boy or a girl? Do you know what the Charlotte law says? Do you know what the Charlotte?
I don't.
Well, let's say it. Let's tell the audience. It was a fine of $500 or a 30-day jail sentence. This is what the liberals brought, a bathroom, restroom, locker room ordinance with a 30-day jail sentence in the city of Charlotte. This is what we overturned. That's the first time I think any of y'all knew that. That's why we took action.
Mr. Cooper.
This is all he can talk about. He goes all over national TV and talks about this. This is why North Carolina is having a problem with its reputation. He continues to talk about that. David, what a lot of people don't know about, and what I think your question is trying to get to, is that if a local government wants to protect people from being fired because they're gay, House Bill 2 says you can't do that. If a local government wants to raise its minimum wage, House Bill 2 says you can't do that. If a local government wants to provide discrimination protection for veterans, and a couple of the cities had those kinds of ordinances that have been wiped away by House Bill 2. This is one of the reasons why House Bill 2 has been pointed out as one of the most discriminatory laws in the country, and why we are suffering such economic damage for it, because it's wrong. It writes discrimination into our law, and it is wrong, period.
Mr. Cecil, do you believe LGBT people should be specifically protected under the state's anti-discrimination law?
I think we need to have all people under the anti-discrimination laws. The HB2, as I talk with people around the state, they keep coming back that they don't want boys in the girls' bathroom. Other than that, repeal HB2, and let's sit down with a reasoned discussion, look at the bill, and write something that takes more than one day to get through the legislature.
Mr. McCrory, if you were reelected, would you push to change House Bill 2 to make it where that LGBT people would be specifically protected under the state's anti-discrimination law?
I actually agree with that concept, and I've been looking for a compromise for months on this issue, but I'll make a deal with him right now. If you agree to take out this gender identity and gender expression regarding access to our schools, locker rooms, restrooms, and showers, I will support in a bipartisan effort to make sure we do not discriminate against the LGBT community in hiring or firing. I signed an executive order for all state employees, which was buried in your newscast, was buried across North Carolina news and national newspapers, which forbids discrimination in the hiring and firing of anyone based upon sexual orientation. And I support that for the private sector. So Roy, let's support that together, but do not support this concept where you've raised millions of dollars to say we're going to now identify gender based upon what you think you are, based upon what you are. You know,
but help me understand before we get to Mr. Cooper.
Yeah.
Why that matters more than an anti-discrimination policy?
I don't understand your question.
Why does the gender identity issue balance the
Let me give you an
discrimination
example.
policy?
The governor of North Carolina runs the state prison system. I've got prisoners now, after this radical agenda has come to North Carolina, I've got male prisoners who want to be transferred to the female prison. This is now this is not just a North Carolina issue. The Justice Department, under the Obama administration, now wants to change the official definition of gender to gender identity, and Charlotte wanted to add gender expression. The next governor, this governor right here, is running the state prisons right now. Now, schools and the prison system, when someone has an individual situation regarding their identity and gender, we've segregated and separated those individuals and made special arrangements. That's what principals have been doing for years in North Carolina. Roy Cooper, the Attorney General, Jennifer Roberts, have all got together and said, no, we need a state law with the threat of a prison sentence for both the private and public sector. This is what he has been supporting, and it's one of the biggest political cons in our history, and sadly, he promoted the boycotts. The head of the Democratic Governors Association helped announce the boycotts, who since has donated millions to his campaign.
Mr. Cooper. That's all he can talk about, but I have to address the boycott. I have been working very hard to encourage businesses to come to North Carolina and help us fight House Bill 2. Many of them have said, I think we're not going to come. We're not going to expand. Braeburn Pharmaceutical Company had announced they were coming to North Carolina. House Bill 2 was passed, and then they said, well, we may not come now. I contacted them. I said, you need to come. You need to come and help us fight House Bill 2. They announced, because I had told them that we were going to fight it together, that they were coming. And then Governor McCrory, like he has most every business that has opposed House Bill 2, he has attacked them. And even the companies who have jobs here and have worked for people in North Carolina, he is attacking them. That's bad for our economy, and one of the reasons why we're in the state we're in.
We've got to
move real quick, who he didn't attack was the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association, who's given him $7-8 million for commercials. The governor of Connecticut called on a boycott of North Carolina. Roy Cooper, who is accepting millions of dollars, said nothing.
I've got to address
Jerry
that.
Brown, the governor of California.
Okay, 15 seconds.
Mayor Cuomo, all members of the Democratic Governors Association. This was all politics.
Mr. Cooper.
That is just flat out not true.
What?
Governor McCrory knows it. If he wants to talk about political contributions, he had a contributor who said he wanted something for his contribution in return. Governor McCrory gave him a private prison contract over the objections of his staff. He's talking about political contributions all night tonight. So if we want to talk about political contributions, Governor, you're the one who now has an FBI criminal investigation as a result of
you, as Attorney General, you should be resign right now for saying that. That is absolutely not true.
Okay.
There is no FBI investigation, and you should apologize right now.
John, we have to move along. Our next topic is the State Crime Lab, and this is for you first, Mr. Cooper.
Sure.
We've heard a lot of talk about problems in the State Crime Lab over the years. You said you've inherited many of those problems from your predecessor. You have been Attorney General for 16 years. Are those problems completely fixed, and if not, why not?
We still have resource issues with the State Crime Lab, and we need to make sure that there are more scientists and more equipment, and we still got a lot of work to do. But this is about leadership. And when I came into office, there were over 5,000 DNA rape kits sitting on local law enforcement shelves, and there were years of shoddy investigations. We came together, put people in charge who knew what they were doing. We eliminated the backlog. We worked to help law enforcement straighten out these investigations. And the crime lab now is helping to convict thousands of people. It is helping to exonerate people. This crime lab is the only one in the country that has certified scientists. And there's tremendous progress that has been made. We found a problem, we fixed it. We didn't blame it on somebody else like Governor McCrory.
Mr. Cecil, what are your thoughts?
I'm not familiar enough with the internals of the crime lab here to know completely how it's working or how much it's actually still with problems. But I was asked by several different people over the past few weeks how that in Charlotte they got the gun said that it was blood on it, and within 24 hours, the news media had the announcement that they were sure from the DNA testing who the gun belonged to, who was carrying it. And they said, but my daughter's rape kit is now 4 months old and still no response. So apparently there is at least a lead time that needs to be looked at on all crimes.
Saying that Crime Lab is fixed is you ought to call your own hotline for fraud and turn yourself in. Because the fact of the matter is the Crime Lab has not been fixed. As your hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on a commercial, it is still broken. If it wasn't broken, why would the city of Fayetteville be right now planning to build its own crime lab? It's because they can't wait on the state crime lab anymore. And that's occurring in city after city, Durham, Greensboro, now Fayetteville and other cities. And that's just a fact.
Do the two of you talk to each other about issues like this? I mean, you're the chief executive of the state. You're the state's top lawyer.
Yes.
It seems like to me you would sit down and have a conversation about what's going on there. And, you know, you talk about 5,000 cases. Are you impugning your former Attorney General, Mike Easley, that you inherited that from him?
Well, I know that there were 5,000 untested
but
rape kits.
But weren't a lot of those waiting for DNA to be matched against? And also, the technology was evolving at that time.
It was, no question.
So to say 5,000 sounds like it's this huge number, which it is, but the context seems to be missing on that.
Well, the context is that the crime lab wasn't even testing no suspect rape kits.
Okay, this leads me to, because we're getting tight on time, I want to talk about transparency. You brought up the lack of emails coming from the Attorney General's office in 16 years. We have tried to get public records from the governor's office, and it's been like running against a wall sometimes trying to get things. Both talk about transparency. It seems very opaque to me what we see in trying to get information to the public. Mr. Cooper, as Attorney General, I've been told that you like to talk on the phone and go down the hall and talk with people in your office. How can you do that as governor? Isn't there a need for a paper trail of what's happened in your office for 16 years?
Absolutely. There is a paper trail. And there
From you?
Absolutely. There are thousands of documents that our office has produced. I helped to write the public records law, believe strongly in transparency. And Governor McCrory has been stonewalling not only the media, but people who ask for public records. He's had to be sued 3 times for public records that he has failed to produce.
If you are elected governor, are you ready to make a statement tonight that you would make public access, public records available within 30 days of request, as an example?
It will be as quickly as possible. And people who deal with our office at the Department of Justice know that we work expeditiously. We work hard to get that information out to the public. And as governor, I will make certain that all of our cabinet members know that this is a directive, that they have to get this information.
And Mr. McCoy, in all fairness, I know that oftentimes attorneys, law firms, media, so many people come for discovery. They're looking for reams of information, and it can overpower any office from doing it. At the same time, we have waited months and months to get information. When you had folks from Duke Energy and to the executive residence for dinner.
You saw that on my public calendar, by the way. Roy Cooper doesn't have a public
But there's
dinner.
no information about what was discussed that night.
Yeah, well, I didn't take notes. I'll tell you what was discussed. I discussed that I was going to veto the bill that they wanted that he's now criticizing. I said, I'm going to veto this thing. It's totally unacceptable, and I'm going to take it to the Supreme Court, which, by the way, the Democrats and Republicans on the Supreme Court supported. And so did Jim Hunt, and so did Jim Martin. So when I took this to the Supreme Court, I got support from Jim Hunt and Jim Martin in my case, and I won with only one dissension in the Supreme Court. So I'm pretty proud of that record. I sued my own Republican legislature. That's how bipartisan I am.
Is there a way to cut through the legalese?
I'll tell you the dilemma I'm finding out in my 3.5, 4 years as governor is it's not the media requests that are causing us problem, it's the super PACs, and frankly a lot of Roy Cooper super PACs during campaign season. The Progress North Carolina North Carolina Progress, they all change. They're all Easley and Purdue ex-campaign workers. They are making more requests and going on witch hunts. And we have to go through every record to ensure that there is not personnel information, which would be against state law if I release personnel information on individuals. So there is an issue of a middle ground. It's not really the legitimate news organizations that cause us a problem. It's the super PACs that are going on witch hunts, and then they get the headline, sadly, on RAL and other stations of going, McCrory can't produce these documents. It is a problem with technology right now.
Mr. Cecil, how would you address it, transparency, if you were elected?
I always advocate as transparent as possible. As Governor McCrory said, though, the personal information out of the employees has to be protected. The recent law on the body cameras for the police address some of that, and I think in a proper way set up so that the judges look at that and the judges can make the decision so that it can be released. It's not up to the individual city council or town council of every little town to make those decisions. I'm fully in favor of transparency everywhere we can, and automating the record retrieval where we can. A lot of this stuff is going to be difficult to get hold of simply because it's on paper record only, and that's the only way they store it.
Next question for you, Mr. McCrory. 4 years ago at a debate, I asked you what additional restrictions on abortion you would support, since you said none at that point. Since then, North Carolina's waiting period for abortion has been extended to 3 days, which is the longest term of any state in the country. Are there further restrictions you would support, and how do you qualify that as not a restriction?
Well, first of all, what I did, what I had to do was I stopped restrictions from being done. And believe me, if I had put further restrictions on women's legal right to have abortion according to the Supreme Court, the courts would have already challenged the current law and overruled us. And I refused to do that. So yes, there's now a phone call needed, 72 hours versus 24 hours. But in doing that, I stopped much more extreme legislation, which was proposed by the Senate, as you well know, and I threatened a veto. And as Roy knows and everyone, you have to make compromises. And the compromise was a 24-hour phone call versus a 72-hour phone call. Had I not done that, the Senate and the House would have had enough votes to override any veto with much stricter restrictions, very similar to Texas, and I refused to cooperate in that effort. I'll tell you what I am proud of, and I mentioned this during our last debate. I also enforced existing laws. I mean, we had an abortion clinic in Charlotte that was treated women like they were going to a meat market as opposed to seeing a physician with a very serious operation, a very serious procedure, where they weren't even mopping the floor in between abortions. It was revolting. And thank God my secretary, Dr. Aldona Voss, said, that's unacceptable, Governor, we need to shut it down. Now we've reopened them because we didn't put further, the restrictions have to do with the actual medical care of women. I don't know where the Attorney General was during the 14 years that this clinic was open, but it's unacceptable to have women treated that way in our abortion clinics that are legal.
We are out of time for Mr. Cooper.
At this very WRL debate in 2012, when you asked Governor McCrory if he would support new restrictions, he said no. Not only the restrictions that you've discussed so far, he also signed legislation that requires women's ultrasounds to be sent to state government bureaucrats. Now, regardless of how you feel about this issue or this policy, to have a woman's ultrasound sent to bureaucrats is wrong. It is a restriction, and it shows you whether you can trust Governor McCrory. And I don't think you can. I think this is just one of the many issues where he has said one thing and he has done another.
1 second.
Well, I just want to say bureaucrats is quite a word, but the medical professionals to ensure that doctors are following the law regarding abortions after 5 months. And I'm sure Roy agrees that there shouldn't be abortions after 5 months unless for the life of the mother.
Mr. Cecil, would you support tighter restrictions on abortion, the same or loosened?
Not at all tighter. As I've told many people, as a libertarian, I feel that the abortion is an issue that's between the patient and her doctor, or the cis woman and her doctor, and that the government should have virtually no no say or control in it and should minimize or not pay for it. The abortion is a serious problem to the woman. I've got 4 friends that over the past 50 years have had one. It has long lingering effects, and throwing the big hand of government in there to stir it around does not help. So no further restrictions.
Mr. Cecil, I'm curious. You've never held public office in your life.
No, sir.
Why should voters have confidence that you can run state government?
I have not held public office. That also means that I don't have a long string of promises to people that are expecting me to pay back the favors. I've had very few contributions to my campaign, no PAC contributions or anything like that. I spent a year in Vietnam helping the Vietnamese understand Tricky Dick Nixon's foreign operations and how we thought the world should be run. And when I left there and came back to the United States, I had had about all the public policy that I wanted for a lifetime. I went into private industry. I got a patent in 1980 that eventually turned into the ATM machines, where when you put in your card, the screen comes on and said, what is your PIN number? And you type in your PIN number, and that all references my prior art. I worked with in the 1990s to get the keyless entry into cars. Most of the new cars you get today do have that. I have a tendency as an engineer to look at what options are available and all options first. And I think that's what is required for what is essentially a CEO position.
Thank you for that. We have less than a minute before we go to closing statements, and I wish we could have gotten to education and a couple of other things. But very quickly, if you can give me a 10-second answer. Should we move per pupil spending in North Carolina, where we're ranking at about 42nd or 43rd right now? Should we spend the money, make the commitment to do it, and can you do it without raising taxes? Mr. Cooper, I'll give you the first word, then Mr. McCrory.
We are 44th in per student spending in North Carolina. That is unacceptable. We have to do much more.
Can you do it without raising taxes?
Yes, absolutely we can do it without raising taxes.
Mr.
Absolutely.
McCrory.
My record speaks for itself. We were 48th in teacher pay. We're going to be down in the low 30s now. That's our next goal. And by the way, our university spending is still very, very strong. One of the best in the nation.
On that note, I'm going to say that each candidate will now have 1 minute to make a closing statement. It's your 1 minute to convince these voters that they should hire you to be the next governor. We will go in reverse order of how we asked the first question. We begin with Lon Cecil, followed by Roy Cooper, and then Pat McCrory. Mr. Cecil.
Thank you. I want to thank WRAL for hosting the event tonight. This, I think, will be instructive to a lot of the voters and help them make their choices, at least to go out for the early voting starting October 20th. We have a lot of revenue sources in North Carolina, and I know all of them are being tapped in every way we can. But we do need more money for the schools. We need more choice for the kids in education. Only 3/4 of them are handled well in high school. We need more online, more homeschooling, more charter school, and vocational schooling. Part of the funding of that is to perhaps tap the currently untapped resource. We have the tax law, but if we go ahead and set up a medical marijuana or medical cannabis law, we can follow the lead of the states like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Nevada for revenue.
Mr. Cooper.
Thanks, David and Laura. All the debates are now over, and it's going to be up to you to decide who leads North Carolina the next 4 years and who you trust to rebuild it. We're facing the worst disaster in eastern North Carolina since Hurricane Floyd, and we need a governor who knows how to rebuild our communities. We've got kids who are in underfunded schools, and we've got many teachers leaving our state for better pay and more respect. And we need a governor who knows how to rebuild the education system. And North Carolina's brand has been tarnished, and our economy has been damaged because of House Bill 2. and we need a governor who knows how to rebuild North Carolina's reputation. If we set our priorities right, North Carolina can be one of the most admired states in this country. I'm going to work hard as your governor to rebuild North Carolina.
Cooper,
thank you for your vote.
Mr. McCrory.
Well, let's have more debates. I'm welcoming more debates so people don't have to make decisions over multi-million-dollar TV ads. I think this is great, and I'd like to have more, and I welcome more. I love our state. I love our people. I was so proud of our people during the coming together of Hurricane Matthew, and I was proud of our leadership, my leadership team that helped in the recovery along with many volunteer agencies and many faith organizations. I was also proud of my leadership team for responding just 4 weeks ago to the Charlotte incident, where we decided to bring the National Guard long before the mayor requested it. And sadly, Roy Cooper was against working with the mayor at the time in the mayor's office during that. I was having to work with the police chief and coordinate with the police chief and hand the powers over the police chief of our National Guard. But I also showed this leadership when I came into this office as the 74th governor 3.5 to 4 years ago, when our unemployment was the 5th highest in the country. We needed to make change. We lowered the income tax. We lowered the business tax. We increased teacher pay. We paid off our debt. That's leadership for the future.
Thank you, and thanks to all three of you. We hope this debate will help you make a decision on who you believe should be North Carolina's next governor. As we heard, early voting begins Thursday the 20th, runs until Saturday, November 5th.
You can contact your local Board of Elections for times and voting locations. We would like to thank all the candidates for being here, and thank you very much for joining us.
Have a good night.